I'm making sure that I'm hitting record. I don't want to make the mistake of doing a Peabody Award-winning interview and not having recorded it.
Oh, technology.
Hello, Pat.
Hi. I don't think we've ever met, and I'm wondering, were you Bruce Pocarney's age? Because you're a Coug as well, right?
A little bit behind Bruce,
Okay.
but I was thinking of that too. We may have crossed paths at press conferences, but I don't think we have ever met until now. The joy of Zoom and podcasting.
Yeah, it's actually made things easier to get guests, I think. I do a show on basic cable in Washington County called Smart Money, and Julia Anderson, who's the former business reporter for the Columbian, is the host. But we went in studio for the first time in a year and a half last Thursday, and just got a message today that we're back on Zoom. But the good thing about that is it's easier to get guests. All they have to do is just click on.
Yeah, I think everybody in the news business. I mean, I'm not there and haven't been there for what is it, 7 years now. But I'm, hey, can we get an interview with XYZ? And yeah, it'll take us about 20 minutes to set up a Zoom call, record it, and we've got what we needed. It's so much different than, where you had to. I mean, think about it. We used to have to drive down to Salem to interview a government leader, and now you can get them on Zoom in about a matter of minutes.
Yeah, it's crazy. Technology has marched along, and I think you probably feel the same way. You had to march with it, otherwise you become a news dinosaur. I mean, it was really difficult for me to learn a computer, but it was learn or die. So I learned computers.
Well, I'm sure you started on a typewriter that was not electric, right?
Yes. Hunt and peck, yeah.
Yeah, and every once in a while your finger gets stuck because you didn't hit the key perfectly.
Right, and then whiteout was our friend too, because who could type perfectly? I sure couldn't. But it's I was in the business for 44 years and then just retired last summer, and it's been a great retirement. I still do freelance work. I work with a nonprofit. I have a grandson who just is the best thing, and coming up on 42 years of marriage, so, and 2 grown kids.
Congratulations on all that. How old is the grandson?
He is 4.
Okay.
His name is Connor, and we had him for the weekend 2 weekends ago, and he told me for the first time, he goes, "I love you." And he said it 3 times. And if you wanted to see a 5'7" woman just melt into a puddle, it was just great.
A hardened news veteran becomes
Yes.
A melted down grandmother. We just had our 19-month-old grandson with us over the last week because my daughter moved back to the area, and it was a joy, but man, we are all wiped out.
Yes, because they want to engage with you, which is wonderful. And there was just an article or an opinion piece in the New York Times about the joy of being a grandparent, that you don't have the responsibility. All you have to do is interact, and you're not the tired working parent coming home. I mean, I worked full time as we raised 2 children and worked mornings like you did and got up at dark 100. And you do it because you're young and have energy, but I probably have noticed a few more things about Connor than I noticed about my own kids. And it's too bad it's that way, but I think there's some truth to it.
Yeah.
That you get to enjoy them, love them, and send them back home.
Yeah. More time to observe and a little more energy to process those observations. Yeah, I'm sorry we didn't meet out in the field, Pat, or in any events. But as is usual with most news folks, I know you well because I heard you so many years on the radio, and when I wasn't working the morning shift and I was driving to work. 44 years. Now that was not all at KEX, but most of it was. Am I right?
21 years at KEX, and then I was at KPAM for about 10 years, and that was a departure at age 56, and I was, I don't think I'm really ready to retire. And I think it was Dave Paul on Facebook, former radio guy, said, "Why don't you go over to KXL, talk to Brian Jennings?" And at the time I had done freelance work. I was blessed enough to be on Portlandia all 8 seasons, and I wanted to explore freelance. So my idea was, well, I still want to work, but what if KXL allows me to peel off when opportunities come up, however inconvenient it may be? And so it actually was a great fit for 9 years. I was part-time. I filled in as morning anchor, afternoon anchor, and also for Rosemary Reynolds as street reporter. And then it would be Murphy's Law. It'd be the worst time ever if I got a freelance job, if Portlandia called, but they were good. Rebecca Marshall was good to her word, and I got to go do the other thing. So that was fun. And then she retired, or didn't retire, but took a job at the Red Cross in the spring of 2020. And I just come back from 2 weeks off and contemplating how much longer do I want to work. And she left, and all of a sudden it became the full-time anchor during a pandemic. And so, and it, to me, I thought I wanted to do that public service because everybody was staying home. I had this thing from Homeland Security saying, yes, I could go down to the Pac West Center and broadcast. And I thought, I've done snowstorms, I've done earthquakes, I've done volcanoes. I can do this for Portland. And I really took that to heart. And I started I forget what we called the segment, but every day at 6:30 in the morning, we would check in with a different mayor. How's it going in your city? What are you guys doing? What's hard? What's working? And that was kind of fun. We got a good catalog of mayoral phone numbers, as it were.
Yeah.
And then one day in June of 2020, I just thought, well, we've got this under control. Rebecca's replacement anchor was coming in July, and I thought I could go back and work part-time until I hit full retirement age, or I might just drop the mic now and go out. And that's that. And it was just, I don't know about you, Carl, but I had a moment of clarity. And so I got to call my own departure, and I haven't looked back since.
Good.
And it's just and sorry for all of you who aren't retired yet, but the joy of waking up without alarm clock. And as a morning person, you know that too. And I don't know how early you still wake up, but I roll out of bed at 5. And I got up when I was filling in for Rebecca. I think I got up at like 2:15 as you did. So just the joy of turning over and going back to sleep or getting up. But to have command of your day, it's really a privilege and a rarity, I think. And just to get to do what I want. And I do believe in public service. If I can plug my nonprofit, I'm on the board of directors at William Temple House, which is in Northwest Portland, and it does low-cost counseling. There's a food pantry, and there's also a thrift store on Northwest 23rd. And I've been on that board since 2015. I have one more year on that, and that is very fulfilling with, as you know, with all your longtime connections in the community, to draw in others to support this nonprofit, and that really fulfills me. And I have taken up the game of golf. I used to get so bored at KEX listening to Jim Howe, my beloved news director, and Bob Miller talk about golf.
Now.
Ad nauseum. And the putts they almost made and the score they almost had. It's like, oh my gosh, if you guys knew how boring this is. And then I was invited one time, and this is being naive about golf. I think the Cancer Society had the prostate cancer challenge out at the Reserve. And I was invited to play in a foursome. I said, well, I don't know how to play, but I'll take a lesson or two, and then sure, yeah. And so my foursome was Bill Schonley, Ken Ackerman, and Teddy Dean from the Swingline Cubs. And you don't know what you don't know until you're out there and realizing they've got to use a couple of my drives as they were. And they were so gracious to me, but that's when I knew there's a little more to this game than I thought there was, but it became not an obsession, but I enjoyed it. And my husband and I took lessons for a while, and then he thought, I'm not having fun. I thought, well, I still enjoy this, so I think I'm going to continue. And there's a group called Executive Women's Golf Association. It is now the amateur LPGA. And so I met women from different walks of life I would never meet otherwise. And there was league play, there was travel. And so it's enriched my life. And especially during the pandemic, it's one of the few things that you could do aside from going to the grocery store masked up. And that's how that kind of kept my sanity during this pandemic. And
I've been working here in Central Oregon at the golf courses at Blackfeet Ranch since we moved out here. And yeah, during the last 2 years, it's one of the great things that people can do outdoors and not really worried about pandemic issues. Yeah. So we've been incredibly busy. And I love, even if I'm not playing and just working, I just love being on the golf course with the people and the things that are going on. The thing about a retirement, I always wonder if retirement is different for people that come from different industries. I mean, I know it is, but for us, retirement means your life's no longer dictated by the news, the snowstorm, yes, or what happened overnight, so that's kind of relaxing. When a big story happens and I see it, it's like, I don't have to worry about that today.
Yes, or if there's a snowstorm, you don't have to call in from home and say, here's what it's doing in my backyard.
Yeah.
But I think people do yearn for that information. And I frankly admire my colleagues at KXL who are still cranking it out during the pandemic. It hasn't been easy. A lot of them have been working remotely. And then when they do go back into the office, it's masked up. And it's been a long haul, and it's not over yet. I mean, I'm sure you're sensing how things are so fluid now again, when we
Mhm.
thought we kind of had crossed over into more positive times. But it's so I admire their longevity doing that.
Yeah, I was working in the golf shop today and was wearing a mask for the first time in several months, and it was very strange to get used to raising it back up when I went inside and taking it off when I went outside. And I think that that's going to be the norm once again here for a while at least. You mentioned let's see, Rebecca Marshall, Dave Paul, and Jim Howe, and Bob Miller, and even more. Just I mean, legendary names in this business that you've been with for all those years. I think you were anchoring for many years with Steve Leader at KEX, and you've worked with some great radio people from Portland over your great career.
It I feel fortunate. I started out, you're a Cougar. I was a Beaver for 2 years, went to UMass on an exchange program for a semester. So I was a Minuteman for a minute. And then I graduated from Oregon. So I'm a Beaver, a Minuteman, and a Duck. But I think I started in radio in Eugene, a rock and roll radio station during my senior year. I was a theater kid. And so when an opening came up at KEZI, I had a great audition because I did theater. So I was used
Yeah.
to, being in front of a camera. However, I was taking J250, or I was taking the Radio TV News Writing 101 class. At the time, I was being a morning anchor at KEZI and going out and reporting a story and still taking 12 hours. And so that was one of those opportunities that came too early. And I was shown the door, and I thought, well, I'm either going to have to develop my armor and be tougher in this business instead of just like, oh no, I just got laid off. And so that was an early kind of bellwether for me, that if you want to stay in this business, nobody's indispensable. There are some hard endings, and you just keep going on. So that helped me out early on to just know that's the way the business is. But I happened to walk into KEX to get a news job the day after Jim Howe's evening news anchor, Melinda Coates, had quit. She moved to Guam. And so he said, well, we're going to do a nationwide search, but if you would like to fill in, and while we do that nationwide search. And so he was such a great boss. We always said, the news staff, that we meant it figuratively, of course, but we'd take a bullet for Jim Howe. He was such an advocate for his people. And I think I was his first pregnant news lady he ever had. And as a father of 5 daughters, he was of the earlier generation, but he was a progressive, and he always encouraged us and believed in us, so that, oh, well, if you believe in me, I guess I will too. And was just a wonderful boss. So I was happy to call him a friend as well. Bob Miller was interesting.
Yeah.
We're great friends, but in the beginning, he was the kind of loud DJ, and I was the ice princess, as it were. So it took intentionality to learn to know each other, because we wouldn't necessarily be somebody walking down the street and say, hey, let's have fun. But we did, and it was just, I think it was fun for both of us. I never knew what he was going to say at the end of a newscast. So I
Yeah.
always had to be ready to ad lib. We became great golf buddies, and
Yeah. In that case, the chemistry took a little work, probably, right?
well, I think it took on-air trust that and it worked, and we had a great time. I was at the tail end of Barney Keep. I was working nights when he was still the morning man, and then I went to his retirement broadcast, which was just awesome. And
I mean, that I was going to ask you about Barney, if you'd crossed that, because he was just a different era, man. He was 60s and 70s radio DJ. I can still remember as a kid watching TV, and he used to do those Beaverton Auto Road. It's the only place to buy ads, And
yes.
my dad pointed out to me that he was the big radio DJ in town. I just thought he was the car commercial guy. but I mean, talk about spanning different eras. When you talk about Barney Keep and his decades, and then Bob Miller and his decades, and the different. I mean, you've been in different kind of ages of radio over time. Uh, it has changed so much. The Barney Keeps of the world no longer exist on the radio.
No, no, not at all. And it was a different time for women when I got in there. I remember when Billy Carter came to the Clark County Fairgrounds to push his Billy Beer and held a news conference. And I was assigned to drive the news cruiser over there. And I was, I don't know, 23, 24. And so I thought, well, I want to localize the story because, okay, Billy Beer, but I'm going to ask him about something that happened locally or that's going on locally, get his take. And so I earnestly, and didn't even see this coming. Today I would, but didn't see this coming. But I said, Billy, I wonder what you think about the Trojan plant, because at the time there was a lot of talk about decommissioning the Trojan plant. And he answered, Trojan, I thought them was rubbers. And I was horrified. It's like, did that just really? And so I'm sure I turned 5 shades of red and didn't have a follow-up question.
No, not for that one.
But so in line with that, the afternoon disc jockey at the time had said, Pat, see if you can get Billy Carter to come out to the news cruiser. At the time we had 2-way radio systems in there, and I'll do a live interview with him.
Yeah.
And I did ask, and he said no. And so I was doing a live report on the air with the disc jockey, and he said, and this is a quote, well, why don't you see if you can unbutton your blouse a button or two and ask again?
Oh, no.
Yeah.
That just got a governor to resign in New York. That kind of stuff.
Different times. Another time, there was a different disc jockey who you would have to go in and get your commercials for your newscast and put them in a rack. They were on cartridges at the time. And I went in there to get commercials, and all of a sudden, I feel somebody playfully biting the back of my neck. And I'm thinking, I don't think I learned in journalism school what you're supposed to do in a situation like this. And so I turned around, I said, hey, the day you bite the general manager in the back of the neck is the day you can bite me in the back of the neck. But it was like the wild, wild west early on.
Shock jocks.
And it's a lot better now. I knew how to hold my own, but some of this baptism by fire stuff, it's like, yeah. What does one do with this? And I know there are worse stories, so mine are rather mild mannered, but the early days the salad days were interesting.
Yeah, again, it has changed a lot. So, I have a pretty good idea because I worked at KGW where we had, a great news crew at KGW and Kink and things like that. But just give an idea of what a radio news anchor's morning and day is like. You come in and how stuff gets started because you're in there early and you got to get ready for your newscast. What was a day like?
Well, when I did the first edition news, we called it aired at 5 for an hour, and I would get in at 3:30 and pull audio stories from our network, which was ABC at the time. I would make beat calls, call the different police departments, see if anything happened overnight. We were, I'm sure you're aware how radio and TV stations would be partners. And so I think at the time we were partners with K2. So I'd call Norm Gunning and see what was going on, or Brooks
he would know.
whoever was on the desk at the time, and exchange story ideas, and then anchor. And so there was writing, there was putting it together, and it was busy, busy, busy. There was, for 8 hours, it was just nonstop. And I think the KEX newsroom just worked their rears off and nonstop. And so to go to a different station and have the pace be different, it's like, wow, I just kind of ran a news marathon over at the other place. And so we were just hard workers and dedicated as many were. And I think, interesting story for me anyway, in my radio TV news writing 101 class, there was this really cute guy with big blue eyes who sat right behind me. And when I was at UMass, I'd heard Betty Friedan speak, and I consider myself a feminist. I thought, I am tired of waiting for a cute guy to ask me out. So on the last day of the final of that class, if he said no, I didn't want to have him sitting behind me for the rest of the quarter. But I asked him out, and I actually didn't ask him out after the final. I chickened out, but his number was in the student directory. And so I called him and said, which I thought this was really kind of suave at the time, but I said, hey, how would you like to get together and shoot the broadcast breeze? Which, I don't know, I
Okay.
thought it sounded really mature at the time.
That's not a bad college pickup line for the broadcast industry.
Well, and the beauty thing of it was, it was on the phone, spring break was coming up. So if he said no, no harm, no foul, but he said yes. And we got married, and it'll be 43 years next May. And he was in the same industry. His name is Link Man. He worked at KXL in
I know
Portland,
Link
I was at
Man.
KEX. Yeah, and what I loved about it, someone being in the same industry, if I came home and said, I had the most perfect sentence that I wrote today, or my mouth wouldn't work today, he understood. And it was collegial back then. There was KYXI. So I started at KEX, I guess, what, 78? No, I got married in 77, so whatever, no, late 70s. But anyway, KYXI, KXL, KGW, Kink, KEX, and it was collegial. We would knock each other's, play hard, but also talk to each other.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really appreciated that. And it was good. And then he left the industry and was a public information officer for the Bureau of Environmental Services for the city of Portland. But I loved having that in common.
Yeah.
And also, he's a smart guy, and I wanted somebody with a good brain,
Yeah.
and he has that as well.
I met your husband many times out in the field, different places. And I'll have to say, I fell for those eyes too. So, oh, so when you left, give me an idea of the difference between radio when you started and radio when you left.
Well, radio when I started had really big, heavy recorders, and
Yeah.
and actually we had at that would be for the field, and then at KEX we had the reel-to-reel machine, and you learned how to splice tape. Your audio cuts were contained on a cartridge, which you would take into the newsroom, news tank with you, and then you'd have to erase them each day, which I don't know if you remember this word from broadcast class. You degauzed them.
Gauzed them.
Degauzed. And then we had AP, UPI, and you ripped the wire. It really, back in the day, it sounds kind of archaic now.
Yeah, there was that machine in the newsroom that would be going constantly, and a bell would ring if it was a major story, an alarm story, and the old term was rip and read. You'd rip it right off that thing and hand it to the news person. They'd read it right on the air cold.
And I still have the radio anxiety dream to this day of getting in there and it being gibberish, and I'm trying to ad lib what the story might be. I don't know if you have any TV anxiety dreams left, but I sure do. But so today, now, for example, on my phone, I have, and I use this at KXL. If I was out in the field, there's an app where you just record there. You can edit it and send it back in to the station. It's just changed dramatically. And then interesting. TV people are used to dealing with pictures, but for radio people, now that there's a web aspect for each story that you do, to become a photographer out in the field, that was new for me. Radio never had to worry about pictures, but now we do in videos. And the computer was a huge thing for me to learn. And I have to be intentional about it because I'm not a technical person. A lot more technical than I was when computers were introduced into the newsroom. And then stories too. I think there are fewer newspapers, and we still have partnerships with newspapers and television stations, but the number of, what I've seen in Portland, the number of stations that do news has really shrunk. And then also the introduction of talk shows that lean one way or the other. News people always assume, or I did at least, that there's this invisible window between the talk show host and the newsroom, and never the two shall meet. I don't think it's always been perceived that way by politicians or by the public. And that happened, I want to say, when the Rush Limbaugh started, where I found in the end at KXL that a lot of Democratic politicians wouldn't agree to be interviewed because of the talk show hosts' leanings, that the station was perceived to be leaning one way. And that disheartened me because I'm sure you too you were raised as a news person or taught as a news person to present both sides of the story, and not in your writing, they should not be able to tell which way you lean. That and today I see reporters tweeting things that seem to lean one way or the other, and it's just like, this is not the news world I know, and that saddens me.
Yeah, when you started, you were in between, music segments and different things like that, and then the news hit at the top of the hour, the bottom of the hour. Now you're mixed in with a lot of interviews, analysts, and opinionated shows. It gets kind of tough to get back to that. Okay, these are 4 or 5 minutes of neutral news that's supposed to be informing the community and not trying to influence it to a certain direction.
And I think TV, not local TV that I've noticed as much, but and I was really glad I didn't have to work during the election, by the way. I wanted to sit that one out. It's just, it was a difficult election. And anyway, so I was glad I retired last July. But you look at your cable news networks, you'll get one slant from Fox, MSNBC, and CNN. And so in a way, if you do want to go to your team, so to speak, you know where to go for information that you want. But I don't know what the answer is, Carl. I mean, what do you think?
Well, that is what is happening in today's society, is people are only getting the news that they want to hear. And you need a better informed electorate, you need a better informed society. I think I talk to some people as we just have to teach them how to at some point be able to educate people on how to gather information and understand its neutrality, and be open to listening, to be willing to go out there and hear that other side that you're not, that's not coming in your Facebook feed, because that's programmed by an algorithm, or they know what you want to hear. And right. I've talked to some friends about this issue, and I think non-news people have a difficult time distinguishing when they're watching, let's say, CNN, what's an opinionated segment that has analysis in it and is leaning a certain direction, from the same segment on the same network that is actually has a news entity where your reporter has checked sources and has getting comment from both sides. Those things are happening in the same place, but people can't tell one from the other.
Right.
And that's difficult.
It is.
You mentioned the technology and the computer. I remember when we got to computers and TV, and over time it got really automated. But I still remember we had a closet at KGW that was full of IBM Selectric typewriters that were the backup, just in case the computer system crashed, that we could run into that room and bring out these typewriters and start typing onto carbon paper our scripts. I don't know if we ever had to use it, but that was there just in case. And within a few years, I'm guessing there were probably most people in the newsroom that probably couldn't understand how to use a Selectric typewriter. It wasn't a keyboard with a backspace on it.
I know. What is this thing?
Yeah.
What I really liked when I started at KXL was I really found that the younger journalists respected the more seasoned journalists, and I think we each knew that we had something to learn from each other. There was a guy in his 20s who showed me how to use NewsBoss, which was the system we used on the computer, and then I could tell him, well, if you want to get information about this, you might want to call this person. And I really appreciated that it was a multi-generational newsroom of mutual respect. So that was a great thing.
Yeah, when I was leaving, which was 2014 was when I left, about a year and a half prior to that, the social media aspect of the news and the newsroom, our web page and our Twitter feed and our Facebook page became much more important. And I was able to transfer into that pretty well, because there were some younger folks in the newsroom that showed me how to do it and why it worked and how it worked. And so that social media generation helped me at least be able to survive long enough to be effectual when I was there doing it. I mean, it's a whole lot more different now, I'm sure. But you're right. I needed some expertise of a more youthful news person, and that always helped. And so that's how I got into social media on news. You mentioned Portlandia, and I have seen you many, many times in that show, and almost sounded like you were a regular on that show. Tell me how you got involved with that wonderful comedy sketch show.
I was asked. I have an agent for freelance work, and I received an audition request, and it was so under the radar the first season. The audition was at Simon Max Hill casting, and it was an ad lib thing. I was supposed to be talking about marijuana, and I forget what I said, but he found it. And again, I thank Bob Miller for teaching me to be better at ad libbing, because you just never know. And whatever I said, he laughed at, and I got the job. And it was down at City Hall. There was no makeup trailer, or I mean, you did your own makeup, and it was just under the radar. And it was really fun. And I think Fred and Carrie tended to invite back people that they liked and that they felt comfortable with. And so there were some seasons when I was on several times. The second season, I was ad-libbing. I was a neighbor lady, and some kid came to my door trying to get me to sign a petition, and I didn't want to. And then he came back with his parents and then the grandparents, and that was pretty much all ad-lib. And that was one of the interesting things about Portlandia, that you had kind of a shell of an idea, and then you just ad-lib. And Fred and Carrie were just such great ad-libbers, and I could go with them because of my radio training and ad-libbing, and so I think that helped me out. Many times I had the great, dramatic stretch of playing a reporter, which I could do.
I was gonna say, you weren't always a reporter on the show, right?
No, I was a neighbor. I was a city council member. It was just, I knew I was lucky at the time, but looking back on it in hindsight, I was just so lucky. And on season 8, I got to shoot my scene. I was on twice that season, but I got to shoot on the last day of production.
Oh, nice.
And they were just always so kind, and it wasn't clear to me how many seasons they were going to have. And I remember I brought in a little handwritten note for Carrie and Fred on the last day, and then to Jonathan, director, and they go, "Oh, we're going to be back." And I go, "Oh, well, here's my little thank you note anyway, save it for the next season." But they were just so kind, and it was wonderful. And I have I got to, Steve Buscemi guest directed one time.
Cool.
And that was the one time where I was really, really, really nervous, because I have enjoyed his work. It's like, oh my gosh. I mean, I had done a scene with Seth Meyers earlier, and I had Googled him and thought, okay, he went to Northwestern, he likes his team. And so I had small talk ready to go with him. But Steve Buscemi, I was just really nervous, and I was playing a TV anchor then, and I had everything memorized. And he said, okay, for your first sentence, look at camera 1, then go over here for the next one, look at camera 2, come to 3, and come back to this. And you have, on a TV show, you have a whole room of people who are watching. And I did my first sentence, and I tried again, and I was just, that was really embarrassing. And so finally, one of the people there just put the first 2 words for the second sentence on the next camera, but it's like, oh my gosh. And then I told him, my son told me that he was the one who wrote, I think, and I'm not even remember the name this time either, but there's an episode in The Sopranos that he wrote, and it was something Pines, when they were chasing the Russian guy out in the woods and never find him. And so I said, my son said to tell you hello, and that he loved your direction of Russian Pines. He goes, well, it was Pine Russian, or whatever it was. I got it backwards. But
oh gosh.
He was very kind, but it was one of those things where I really needed to calm down to do the job. And so that was probably my hardest scene I ever did.
Oh, and yeah, what a big time name to get as a director. I know they had lots of folks come in, do lots of cameos, but Buscemi he is so awesome at that. I got to one casting call for some reporter that they wanted for that show, and never got. I'm sure I never got out of the door. When I walked in there, it was after I retired, just shortly after I retired, and sitting in there were like 5 or 6, retired TV people. I know you. We were all sitting there, And then I watched the episode, and they hired a non-TV person. They had an actor to play the TV person role.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, that some actor beat us all out at our own game.
Yeah, it was a great opportunity. The other thing I wanted to tell you about, and this is just me being a dork. After Princess Diana died, I was anticipating that Bob Miller was going to ask me on the air, are we going to be broadcasting her funeral? So by that time, Brad Ford was news director, and I popped my head into his office and said, "Hey, Brad, are we airing Princess Diana's funeral?" I said, "By the way, I speak fluent British. My passport's current." Ha, 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 ha. Well, that afternoon, I got a call at home. He said, "Are you sure your passport's current?" I said, "Yes." He goes, "We're going to send you to London." And I happened to, in our family, we would save cash for Christmas presents. And so I happened to have Christmas present money in the drawer. So I took that, and they put me on the plane in the morning. I'd never been to London. And so I looked in the Oregonian. Oh, it's going to be 68 in London tomorrow. Okay, I'll pack this. And it was born out of that comment of just saying, ha, 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 I then reported for a week from London for a string of stations that I forget what, whether it was Taft or what we were at the time.
Whatever company owned you, right?
But it was the opportunity of a lifetime. And I think that is the thing that has meant the most to me in my career was being able to go and cover that. And I, as the princes walked toward the cathedral, I was literally curbside to history, and I saw the princes in the tuck of their chin, and I'll never forget that. And it was such an opportunity to spend a week there.
Yeah, an unfortunate event, but a huge news event, and I'm sure that your value. I mean, all that strength that you got being that tough news reporter and standing up to Bob Miller and learning from him paid off there, because you're on, in radio, you're pretty much on your own. When I traveled for news stories, I always had at least a photographer with me, sometimes a producer, but you were it.
Well, and not only that, but they didn't have a hotel for me yet. And so they sent me and I was supposed to call when I got to London. Well, there was a stopover in Minneapolis, and there was a British woman who was on the flight, and her name was Jean, I learned, and we were talking, and I said, I called KEX. They said, "We don't have a place yet." I said, "Well, maybe I'll ask her if I can stay at her house and we'll pay her." And so I said, "Would you mind terribly if I spent the night at your house?" And she said, "No." And she goes, "My daughter works for the BBC." And so it all worked out.
Nice.
So I spent the first night at their house, and then they got me a hotel room near St. James's Palace. But tell me what you would have done in this situation, because this woman is opening up her home to me. She's lovely. I met her daughter. She was great too. I'm upstairs in the bedroom, jet lagged, and trying to go to sleep. And there's this humongous spider on the wall. And I hate spiders. And I thought, do I just ignore the spider and try to go to sleep? And maybe he climbs over me and I get a spider bite. And I didn't. I went down and I just said, "I am so sorry, but there is a spider in my room and I'm really afraid of spiders." So I just couldn't, everything was so foreign to me. The spider just sent me over the edge. I couldn't handle it.
And do they handle spiders in Britain differently than we do?
Well, they were gracious and got rid of it, and I don't know what happened to it. But
well,
anyway, so that was.
I would have had to been the person taking care of it, because I was the spider dad in our house. So.
Oh, were you?
Yeah, I would have come to the rescue. I think about that in the time that you spent in London. Do you remember when the Tanya Harding story hit back in the early 90s? Our newsroom at KGW was full of NBC reporters and producers. Ann Thompson was there because at that point she worked for the Detroit O&O, and she was there, and they were there for a month. And I mean, our newsroom was like, it was like a camp cabin, summer camp, because there were people in all these different corners covering the story and filing stories for different entities. And that lasted a lot longer than a week. That was a bizarre time in our news at Portland.
Oh, it really was. It really was. And I remember when there was the Tanya Harding musical, Bob and I think somebody else went and watched, and there was Tanya Harding in the audience laughing at seeing the portrayal of her on stage and laughing at times where you think, oh, was that funny? And so that was a surreal thing to see.
Mm-hmm.
And then the movie was very interesting as well. But yeah, that whole Tanya Harding thing. I mean, Connie Chung smoking at the ice arena with her, waiting to do interviews. I mean, everybody was there. It just took all the oxygen out of the city.
And I have said this on a couple other podcasts who have been talking to folks. I unfortunately was the reporter who discovered Tanya Harding, because her coach Diane Rawlinson called our newsroom and I in the sports department, and she said, I've got this young skater who's 13 years old and she does more triple jumps than any of the senior women who are competing in the United States. And I think it's worth a story. And myself and a photographer, Terry Renneria, went out early in the morning to the Valley Ice Arena and watched this little girl do all her 5 different triple jumps, and interviewed her coach and interviewed her about wanting to be an Olympic champion. And within a year she was at the nationals, and within a couple of years, all heck broke loose.
Wow. Well, way to go. Did you get a commission or discovery fee?
Nope. I think probably people should be charging me for doing that.
Wow.
I have to pay back the community for starting all that.
I don't know if you knew, but between the time I left KEX and before KPAM went on the air, which was about from September to May, I worked at Channel 12 on Good Day Oregon. And when Tony Martinez went on paternal leave for the first time, they said, Pat, do you want to be the traffic reporter? And I said, well, I've never been in a helicopter before, but I'll go up and see. And so I did. And Daryl Mitchell, who was the photographer up there, is a wonderful guy.
Oh, Daryl was the greatest.
Isn't he?
I love that man, because he worked at Channel 8 for a while before he went to 12.
Yeah, I love him too. But there was one day where it was dark, we were hovering, and I think it smelled like fuel. And I was coming up with my traffic report in about 20 seconds. And there are no secrets in a helicopter. And so I said, Daryl, get me the barf bag. And I tossed my cookies. And then 10 seconds later, I had to go on the air. And so I had tears, and of course the control room had seen everything. And so I had, kind of tears in my eyes, and I did this short little report, but I think I won the respect of the control room that day, because the show must go on. And then Tony came back from his paternal leave, and then Curran Snipes, who was the on-air business reporter, left. And so they asked if I wanted to do that. And it was a wonderful opportunity, because I got to keep my name, my face out there until KPAM went on the air. But I got to work with Kathy Smith, and I love her. And she was so kind to me, and and I wasn't really a business reporter, but I grew to that position. But there was one time, and you had to get your own little, what do you call them? The fonts, whatever you're airing behind you. So I was doing a story about Apple.
You're over the shoulder.
Yes. And I was going through the catalog, and I didn't know. And so I found a Macintosh apple, a green apple. And so here I am, and it's up behind me, and it's just a regular green apple. It's not the Apple logo at all. Right. So they were kind and worked with me, so I kind of got more familiar with it. But she was very, very supportive of me, and she's just, a dear friend. I'm very lucky to have met her and have learned from her.
As I was lucky enough to be there when I first started out, Kathy was the main anchor at KGW, and she was the first person I went to back in January when I wanted to start this podcast. She was my first guest.
Oh, good choice.
Yeah. Well, Pat, this has been great. Thanks for spending a little time reliving the great days of radio in Portland and your wonderful career. Now I can officially say that we met, and we're now friends, podcast buddies.
Yes. Well, thanks for having me on. I appreciate that you wanted to chat about old times, and I wish you the best.
All right. And we do the same, and continued love of your retirement and your grandchild, and many more years of that to come, I hope, Pat. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.